Another question here?
Hi. Probably like most of the people in here, most of my life I've been doing either military service or policy work regarding Afghanistan and Iraq. In terms you said, I don't think that Iraqi refugees that have been displaced can come back. I was in Beirut this summer working with the 70,000 or so Christian refugees that are there. I agree. I don't think they could go back or should go back. So I kind of want to bypass the Iraq question and go to strictly to Afghanistan. Does the refugee situation in Afghanistan hinder, hurt, or benefit us in getting our troops out of Afghanistan? Because I'm in favor of getting our troops out of Afghanistan as soon as possible. I just don't know whether this issue, granted it's an important issue, I just don't know this issue matters to us in terms of getting our troops home. So any comments on that would be helpful.
I mean, those who remain in Iran and Pakistan, I don't think they've got anything to do with your troops in Afghanistan, unless you make the argument that that's where the insurgency recruits from. But they recruit internally and recruit from other things as well. So I wouldn't say in resolving, unfortunately, but be honest, I think from a military standpoint, those who remain in Pakistan and Iran probably have little to do with your exit. I think what may have anything to do is what goes inside the country. But I mean, it really depends. I think the exit for me is linked to the fact, what do you want in the end? What do you want to leave behind? And if you ask me why the Afghans don't want you to withdraw, they probably would be quite happy if you scale down the troops, have them be less aggressive out in the field doing the night raids, which I hear is 3,000 per month right now. I'd like to see success rate, but anyway, so I once want to see statistics of the people that they really get. Yeah, I think most Afghans would be quite happy if you scale down and do maybe something more robust. I'm not even sure whether there's a word for it, because peace building is a very difficult word right now for Afghanistan, but at least less aggressive fighting, because I'm actually would be with you. I feel sorry for the people fighting, because it's not a military solution, and they can't even win against the enemy they're up against. And if you clear area and can't hold them, why bother? So I think there's just a different strategy you need to apply. But I'm not sure that actually displacement is really actually linked to that. So I know the military is looking a bit into it, because we wrote a paper with Brookings on protection of IDPs, and a defense contractor rewrote that paper, calling it IDPs a tactical liability. So I know the military is kind of looking in that, but unfortunately probably not quite the way we'd like to look at it, looking as a protection issue. They see it as a problematic issue, because potentially, I mean, right now potentially the insurgent can recruit from various marginalized groups, be it IDPs, being Kuchi nomads, being anybody that is against the government. We've recently also asked people to define what the Taliban is for them, and most of them don't actually see them anymore as the ideologues, as the first movement. The secondary Taliban movement is much different. It's being described as people that really have a problem with the government. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's very, very complex.
Are refugees more likely to? Are refugees highly likely to join the insurgency
than others?
Quick follow-up was: Are refugees? Do we know statistically, are they more likely or less likely, or do we know anything about whether they're likely to join the insurgency or be part of any sort of jihadist movement whatsoever?
Statistically, I think we don't really know, because those studies haven't been done. What I would think is a marginalized community, as I can say, be it the internally displaced, which doesn't get assistance from the government, we need protection, can't find a strongman to protect them. There's a higher likelihood for them being recruited. And so is the Kuchis, which are a form of internal displaced, because right now they're not getting land, they're not being settled, they're getting in conflict with the host population, they may have land conflicts with host population or strongmen. Yes, they're also more likely, because the insurgency doesn't entrench itself in conflicts where they feel that they can recruit.
And one of the complaints of the Pakistan military is that the Afghan refugee camps inside Pakistan are the safe havens for the Taliban, who keep their families in Pakistan camps and go across. No, but it's a claim. Yeah. Do you have any? Has there been any research on whether that's accurate or not?
Well, but I mean, if you look at then, that's the Pakistani politics they're playing. Because if you look at the camps they've closed versus they kept open, Shamsad Do was always a Hekmatyar recruitment camp. That's the one that they kept open. So basically, I think maybe the Pakistan military tells, but they know exactly the camps where they're recruiting from. So I think. That's my
And
opinion.
they've closed the groups that they don't like.
I think they closed in the areas like the Waziristan camps that were closed down, then they pushed refugees across the border back into Afghanistan, which they called voluntary return, which when we talked to them coming across in Paktianhos was forced return, and they pushed insurgents across with it. They embedded into the populations. So I think there's a lot of game playing going on. And yes, while they still have recruitment and a lot of the madrasa training is still done in Pakistan, I mean, as the Afghans will tell you, why is the Quetta Shore called the Quetta Shore, but then try to get access. They tend to be so embedded in urban areas. A lot of people claim they're protected by ISI. So that's why I said that basically to solve the problem, that's a political issue you need to solve where Pakistan needs to be part of the solution, that you cannot independently just solve in Afghanistan. And the same thing with withdrawing of the troops. I think that is a political issue that needs to be addressed with Pakistan, unfortunately. So,
Another question? Question over here, please.
Yeah, I just want to know, how do you categorize the people who are displaced because of the U.S. missile strikes in Waziristan? I mean, there were a lot of people, tribesmen, who were actually displaced. How do you categorize those in terms of international, definitions?
well, they would be internally displaced unless they go across the border. I don't know why we would categorize them differently. So conflict-induced displacement is one of the categories being used.
Is there any support for IDPs?
Well, I know that in Pakistan that the ones displaced by natural disaster as well as the conflict. And like I say, there they emphasize it's a conflict between two parties, not just similar something, that happened because the drone strikes happen in response to a conflict that is with the Pakistani Taliban. The same thing in Afghanistan, they're called conflict-induced. I think assistance is difficult if they don't go to areas where they can be provided assistance, because often they tend to, I know less in Pakistan, but often they just tend to go to relatives somewhere and then, they kind of blend in. So the problem with the new displaced is they're more blending in because there's really no camps for them to go to receive assistance, because largely the way we see assistance is a camp-related assistance. And there's a fear of opening camps to have a essentially pull factor. I know in Afghanistan they don't like to open new IDP camps to pull people in. So I think the assistance is difficult. And it's probably on a one-on-one basis. I know that people in Afghanistan who have left from airstrikes at the PRTs do some assistance, but we know very, very little about that because each PRT does it differently. USAID has some programs of compensation that you can apply. So there are programs. I don't know how systematic they are, and I don't know how systematic their research and how much we understand about and whether they even reach all the people that are being displaced. So there are programs in place.